Welcome to HOA Legends. Let's begin today's story. The first time I heard these sirens, I thought someone was dying. They weren't, they were coming for me because I refused to blow snow. That how insane this HOA had become. It was 6:12 a.m. Still dark outside, the kind of winter morning where the world is silent under thick snow. I was halfway through my coffee when red and blue lights started flashing across my living room's walls for a split second. I panicked, my heart jumped into my throat. Please, cars don't show up in quiet suburbs before sunrise unless something is very wrong.
I stepped onto my porch in boots and a jacket, confused and groggy. Two officers were walking up my driveway. Behind them, standing near the curb like she was hosting a parade, was Linda Harper, the HOA president, bundled in a long coat, arms crossed, lips tied with victory. That's when I knew. This wasn't an emergency. This was revenge. One of the officers asked, "Sir, did you refuse to clear the community parking lot after being asked multiple times?" I actually laughed. I thought he was joking. "I'm sorry," I said. "The what?" "The parking lot," he repeated. "For the HOA." That's when it hit me. Linda had really done it. She had actually called 911 because I refused to use my snowplow to clear 27 parking spaces for free. Let me explain. I own a small snow removal truck. Nothing fancy. I use it for my driveway, my parents' house, and a few paying clients during winter. It's how I make extra income. Everyone in the neighborhood knows this. Including Linda. Especially Linda. The night before, she knocked on my door with a clipboard and that fake polite smile she uses before saying something outrageous. "We're asking you to plow the HOA parking lot tomorrow morning," she said. As a good neighbor. I asked, "Are you hiring me?" She smiled wider. "No. This would be voluntary. Community spirit." I said no. Politely. Clearly. Finally. And apparently, that was unacceptable. Now here were two police officers in my driveway because an HOA president couldn't handle being told no. The second officer looked embarrassed. "Sir," she said, "you were creating a safety hazard by refusing." I pointed at my driveway. "My property is cleared. The road is city responsibility. The parking lot is HOA property. I don't work for the HOA." Behind them, Linda's face was turning red from the cold or rage. This wasn't about snow. This was about control. And she had just escalated this into something she would deeply regret. One of the officers shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable, boots crunching in the fresh snow. "Ma'am," he called toward Linda, "can you come over here a moment?" She marched up the driveway like she was approaching a courtroom podium. Chin high. Clipboard clutched. That same tight smile that never reached her eyes. "I told you," she said to the officers, loud enough for me to hear, "he's refusing to help the community during a dangerous weather event." I folded my arms. Refusing to do unpaid labor on private HOA property is not a crime. The younger officer coughed to hide what looked like a laugh. Linda ignored me. "He owns a plow truck. He has the equipment. The parking lot hasn't been cleared. Residents can't get out safely. This is negligence." I blinked at her. "Negligence? I don't work for you." She snapped back, "You live here." That's when I realized her logic. In her mind, ownership of equipment meant obligation. If you had the ability, you had the duty. And if you refused, you were the villain. The older officer asked calmly, "Sir, were you contracted by the HOA to perform snow removal?" "No." "Have you ever agreed to do this for them?" "Never." Linda cut in, "He did it once 2 years ago." I nodded. Because my friend lived here and paid me. I invoiced him. He paid cash. That was a job, not charity. The officer looked at her. Did the HOA pay him then? She hesitated. Well, no. But that's not the point. It was exactly the point. I pulled out my phone and opened my gallery. I still had a photo of the handwritten receipt from that day. I showed it to the officer. See? Payment received. This is what work looks like. Linda's face tightened. She hated evidence. The officer handed my phone back. Ma'am, this is a civil matter. Not a police issue. Her voice rose. People are trapped. This is an emergency. I gestured toward the street. A city snowplow rumbled past at that exact moment, clearing the road perfectly. Funny timing, I said. The officer watched it go by, then looked at the untouched HOA parking lot across the street. Has the HOA contacted a snow removal service? Linda went quiet. Silence said everything. They hadn't. Because hiring a service would cost money. Money the HOA didn't want to spend, when they believed they could pressure me into doing it for free. The officer's tone changed slightly. Firmer now. Ma'am, 911 is for emergencies. This is not one. Linda's cheeks flushed bright red. So you're not going to make him do it? He stared at her. That's not how this works. And that's when the power dynamic flipped. She realized the police weren't here to enforce her authority. They were here to witness her embarrassment. Linda didn't argue with the officers after that. Not directly. She did something worse. She smiled. It was the kind of smile people use when they've already decided to punish you in a different way. All right, she said softly, adjusting her gloves. If that's how he wants to be. The officers exchanged a look. They knew that tone. I knew that tone too. It was the voice of someone who had just moved the battle from public to paperwork. They left. The lights disappeared. The street went quiet again. But I knew this wasn't over. By noon, my email proved I was right. Subject line, HOA violation notice community endangerment. I almost spilled my coffee laughing. According to the notice, I was being fined $500 for refusal to assist in community safety efforts during a declared weather emergency. There was no declared emergency. There was no rule requiring residents to perform free labor. And there was definitely no clause about owning equipment meaning HOA responsibility. But Linda had typed it up anyway, signed it, stamped it, and sent it like it was law. That's when I stopped laughing. Because this wasn't just petty anymore. This was documented harassment. I printed the notice. Then I printed the HOA bylaws. All 38 pages. I sat at my kitchen table like I was preparing for a court case. I read every line. Snow removal responsibility, HOA managed property must be serviced by contracted vendors. Residents, not responsible. Voluntary assistance, cannot be enforced, requested, or implied as obligation. I read that line 3 times. Cannot be requested. She had requested it. On video. Because I had a doorbell camera. I opened the footage from the night before. There she was, smiling, asking me to plow the lot as a good neighbor. I saved the clip. Then I went to my garage and took a photo of my truck. On the door was my small business magnet, Snow Services licensed and insured. This wasn't a hobby. This was my income. And she had just tried to force me to give it away for free, then fined me when I refused. I scanned everything into one folder. Violation notice. Bylaws. Video clip. Photo of the truck. Old receipt from 2 years ago. Because now, this wasn't about snow. This was about proving something. Linda thought she could bully me because most people don't fight back. Most people just pay the fine to avoid stress. I am not most people. I wrote one email. Subject, formal dispute of violation with evidence. And I attached everything. Then I hit send. And waited. Linda didn't reply to my email. Not that day. Not the next. But 3 days later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox with the HOA logo stamped across the front like a court summons. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Notice of emergency HOA board meeting attendance required. I laughed out loud in my kitchen. Emergency meeting. Over snow that had already melted. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday at 10 a.m. in the community clubhouse. Attendance, mandatory for involved parties. That meant me. I knew what this was. Linda wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. She wanted a stage. She wanted an audience. She wanted to turn this into a public shaming where she could twist the story and make me look like the selfish neighbor who refused to help during a crisis. What she didn't realize was that I was bringing receipts. Saturday morning, the clubhouse was already half full when I walked in. A few residents glanced at me, whispering. I could feel it. Linda had been talking. At the front of the room sat Linda and 2 other board members behind a folding table like a panel of judges. A stack of papers sat beside her. She looked confident. Too confident. She began as soon as I sat down. Thank you all for coming to address a serious matter affecting our community's safety and cooperation. Cooperation. That word again. She launched into a speech about community spirit, responsibility, and how certain residents refused to help during the snowstorm, leaving others at risk. People nodded. Some looked at me. Then she said it. He owns professional snow removal equipment and refused to use it when asked. Murmurs spread. I raised my hand calmly. Can I speak? She hesitated, then forced a smile. Briefly. I stood up, walked to the front, and placed a folder on the table. I'd like to show everyone something before we continue. I handed copies of the HOA bylaws to the other board members and projected a page onto the screen using the clubhouse TV. Snow removal responsibility, HOA must hire contractors. Voluntary help cannot be requested or implied. The room went quiet. Then I played the doorbell footage on my phone and held it up. Linda's voice filled the silent room. We're asking you to plow the parking lot tomorrow morning, as a good neighbor. A few people turned to look at her. Her confident posture cracked for the first time. And I wasn't done yet. You could feel the air shift. Moments earlier, I was the villain in Linda's story. Now people were leaning forward in their chairs, eyes bouncing between me and the screen. I placed one more paper on the table. A receipt, I said calmly. Linda's eyes narrowed. She recognized it immediately. This is from 2 years ago. The one time I plowed this parking lot. Murmurs again. I continued, a resident hired me privately. I invoiced him. He paid me. This was a paid job. Not a favor. Not volunteer work. I held the paper up so everyone could see the handwritten amount and signature. That's how this works. If you want my equipment, my time, and my fuel, you hire me. One of the board members, an older man named Carl, adjusted his glasses. Linda, did the HOA ever contract him for services? She didn't answer. Carl looked at her again. Did you? No. You could feel the air shift. Moments earlier, I was the villain in Linda's story. Now people were leaning forward in their chairs, eyes bouncing between me and the screen. I placed one more paper on the table. A receipt, I said calmly. Linda's eyes narrowed. She recognized it immediately. This is from 2 years ago. The one time I plowed this parking lot. Murmurs again. I continued, a resident hired me privately. I invoiced him. He paid me. This was a paid job. Not a favor. Not volunteer work. I held the paper up so everyone could see the handwritten amount and signature. That's how this works. If you want my equipment, my time, and my fuel, you hire me. One of the board members, an older man named Carl, adjusted his glasses. Linda, did the HOA ever contract him for services? She didn't answer. Carl looked at her again. Did you? No, she muttered. The word barely left her mouth, but everyone heard it. I kept going, calm and steady. And when I politely declined to do unpaid work, she called the police and then fined me $500 for community endangerment. Gasps rippled across the room. A woman in the back whispered, "She called 911 for that." I nodded. The officers told her this was not a police matter. All eyes turned to Linda. Her confident posture had completely dissolved. She was shuffling papers that no longer mattered. I placed the printed violation notice beside the receipt. "This," I said, tapping the fine, "is retaliation." Carl picked up the notice and read it slowly. His eyebrows lifted higher with every line. "This wording isn't even in our bylaws," he said. "Exactly," I replied. Another board member leaned toward Linda. "You wrote this yourself." She tried to recover. "I was acting in the best interest of the community." I smiled slightly. "By inventing rules." A few people laughed. Quietly, but enough. Then I delivered the part I had saved. "I run a licensed snow removal service. This is part of my income." What she asked for wasn't neighborly help. It was free professional labor. That landed hard. Because everyone in that room understood money. Understood work. Understood being taken advantage of. And suddenly, the story wasn't about snow anymore. It was about someone trying to force a neighbor to work for free, and punishing him when he refused. Linda had wanted a public meeting. She just hadn't realized who it would expose. The silence after my last sentence was heavy. Not awkward. Not confused. Heavy with realization. People weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at Linda. A man near the front spoke first. "Wait, so the HOA never hired a snow service for the lot at all?" Carl flipped through the bylaws again. "It clearly says we're supposed to." Another resident added, "Then where does that part of our dues go every winter?" That question hit harder than anything I had said. Because now this wasn't my problem. This was everyone's problem. Linda tried to regain control. "We're getting off topic. This meeting is about his refusal to cooperate during a dangerous storm." A woman stood up. "No, this meeting is about why you tried to fine him for something that isn't a rule." Murmurs of agreement spread. Someone in the back said, "And why you called 911 over it." Linda's face flushed again. "I believed residents were at risk." I spoke calmly. "The city cleared the roads. The parking lot is HOA responsibility. You chose not to hire anyone." Carl looked up. "Is that true?" Linda didn't answer fast enough. That hesitation was louder than words. Another neighbor chimed in, "My car was stuck because the lot wasn't plowed. I assumed the HOA had someone coming." "So did I," someone else said. "So did we," echoed from the side. This was the moment everything tipped. People realized they had been paying for a service that wasn't being arranged, while Linda tried to force me to cover the gap for free. Carl's voice was firmer now. "Linda, did you attempt to hire a contractor before asking him?" She hesitated. "No, I thought that he would just do it," I finished gently. No one laughed this time. Because it wasn't funny anymore. It was exposure. A retired woman near the window shook her head. "This is misuse of authority." Another added, "And misuse of our dues." Linda looked smaller behind the table. The clipboard that once looked official now looked like a prop. I didn't need to say anything else. The room had taken over. And they weren't defending her. They were questioning her. Carl cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair, the old plastic creaking under the shift in weight. The energy in the room had changed completely. This was no longer a meeting about me. This was a meeting about Linda. I think, Carl said slowly, choosing his words with care, we need to pause this discussion and address something more immediate. Linda looked at him sharply. We are in the middle of an agenda item. He didn't even glance at her. Yes. And the agenda item has revealed a larger issue. People nodded. Carl continued, as board members, we're responsible for following the bylaws. And from what I'm seeing here, we didn't. Linda's voice sharpened. We? This was my decision. That's the problem, he replied. A murmur of approval moved through the room. He turned to the residents. How many of you believed the HOA had a snow removal contract for the parking lot? Nearly every hand went up. Linda's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Carl asked the next question carefully. And how many of you were unaware that no such contract existed? Hands stayed raised. Then he asked the one that sealed it. How many of you are concerned about how this situation was handled? This time, hands went up faster. Linda looked around like she was seeing the room for the first time. The support she expected wasn't there. The nods. The agreement. Gone. Replaced with crossed arms, frowns, and disappointed looks. Carl folded his hands on the table. Linda, I think it would be appropriate to call for a procedural vote. Her head snapped toward him. A vote for what? He held her gaze. A vote of confidence in your position as HOA president. The room went completely still. You could hear the heater humming in the corner. Linda's face drained of color. You can't be serious. I am, he said calmly. She looked at the other board member for support. He avoided eye contact. Carl stood up. All in favor of holding a vote. Nearly every hand went up. Linda didn't even look at me anymore. Because this had nothing to do with me now. This was about accountability. And she had just lost the room she thought she controlled. No one spoke for a long moment after the hands went up. It felt unreal. Like the room itself needed a second to catch up with what had just happened. Linda sat frozen, staring at the sea of raised hands. Her authority, the thing she wore like armor, had quietly evaporated in less than 10 minutes. Carl nodded slowly. All right. We'll proceed. He explained the process in a calm, procedural voice. A simple majority from attending residents was enough to remove a board member from their position pending a formal review. Most people in the room hadn't known that rule existed. Linda definitely hadn't expected to be on the receiving end of it. Ballots were improvised using scrap paper from a stack near the coffee machine. People wrote quickly, seriously. No one was smiling now. This wasn't drama anymore. This was correction. I stepped aside and watched. Because this part didn't belong to me. This was between her and the people she was supposed to represent. Carl collected the papers and counted them at the front table with the other board member. You could hear the soft rustle of paper as he sorted them into two piles. Linda finally spoke, her voice thin. This is ridiculous. All over a misunderstanding. Carl didn't look up. This isn't about snow. She had no response to that. After a minute, he finished counting. He exhaled slowly, then turned to the room. The vote is overwhelmingly in favor of removal. A quiet wave of relief moved through the residents. Not applause. Not celebration. Relief. Linda stared at the table, hands clenched together. For the first time since I'd known her, she had nothing to say. Carl continued gently, Linda, effective immediately, you are suspended from your role as HOA president pending formal review. That was it. No shouting. No argument. No dramatic exit. Just consequences. She gathered her papers without looking at anyone and walked out of the clubhouse. The door closed softly behind her. And just like that, the loudest person in the neighborhood left in complete silence. Carl turned to me. I believe we also owe you an apology. Several people nodded. I shook my head. I just didn't want to plow a parking lot for free. A few people chuckled quietly. But everyone understood now. This had never been about snow. It had been about someone believing they had power over others. And learning, very publicly, that they didn't. By the time I stepped outside the clubhouse, the sun had come out. Snow on the sidewalks was already melting into slush, dripping from rooftops in steady rhythms. It felt symbolic. Like the entire situation was dissolving with it. A few neighbors walked out with me. One of them, the woman who had spoken up earlier, said, "I honestly thought you were being stubborn at first." I smiled. Most people did. She nodded. I get it now. That sentence meant more than any apology. Because understanding is what Linda had never bothered with. Another neighbor asked, "So, you really do this for a living?" I laughed. "Yes. And I charge for it?" He shook his head. "She really thought you'd just do it for free." Apparently. We stood there for a moment in the cold air, not as opponents in a meeting, but as neighbors again. Normal. Carl came out last, holding the folder I had brought. He handed it back to me. "You were prepared." "I had a feeling I'd need to be." He gave a tired smile. "You shouldn't have had to. That was the truth of it. None of this should have happened. If Linda had simply hired a snow service like the bylaws required, no one would have cared. If she had accepted no as an answer, none of this would have escalated. But some people don't hear no. They hear challenge. And when you don't back down, they push harder, until they push too far." A week later, a notice went out to the entire neighborhood. The HOA had signed an official snow removal contract with a local company. Not me. I noticed that detail immediately and smiled. They never asked again. The $500 fine disappeared from my account without a word. No apology email. No explanation. Just gone. Which was fine. Because the real correction had already happened in that clubhouse. And the funny part? 2 days after the meeting, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a quiet voice said, "Hi, this is Linda." I didn't say anything. She cleared her throat. "I was wondering, how much you charge to plow a parking lot." I let the silence sit for a second. Then I said, "I'll send you a quote."
Thanks for watching. If you enjoy it, please subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in comments. Your support means the world to me.